What if Russia collapsed in its civil war? The Russian Civil War was a complicated conflict in Russia from 1917 to 1923, and it would see the anti-communist whites against the communist reds, but also with involvement from the anarchist greens, independence movements, and intervention by both the Central Powers and Entente. In the end, the communists under Vladimir Lenin did end up winning and formed the Soviet Union. But what if that didn't happen? What if Russia collapsed in its civil war? In this timeline in 1919, as the white movements collapses, Lenin is assassinated in Moscow, and now also the Reds collapse. A power vacuum is formed and Russia falls into a period of warlordism. The Soviets collapse into three main components: the Trotskyists in Moscow, the Bukharinists in Leningrad, and the Stalinists in Stalingrad. But the Kronstadt rebels managed to secure Leningrad itself, and Bukharin flees to Novgorod. In Chernihiv, the West Russian Volunteer Army, better known as the Bermontians, settle, and they are hostile to the communists on their left flank. Further west, the Patriarchy of Vologda under Patriarch Tikhon, while in Gorky, the fascist state of Gorky under Ivan Ilyin is formed. Kronstadt wasn't the only anarchist state under the banner of the Green Army, because so were Samara and Voronezh. Penza and Vyazma were under pro-white democratic republics. The Idel Ural State, People's Army of Komuch, People's Republic of Kuban, Almighty Don Host, Mountainous Republic of the Northern Caucasus, Georgia, Armenia and Azerbaijan declared independence, while the General Command of the Armed Forces of South Russia under Anton Denikin fled to Stavropol. The League of Nations meanwhile occupied northern Russia. Things weren't much better east of the Urals. In Yekaterinburg, where Nicholas II got killed, Kirill I forms the Principality of Yekaterinburg, while to their north the Green Army of Ugar resides. The Siberian Army broke in two. The Russian state, now the provisional government of Omsk under Alexander Kolchak, is only left with Omsk, while the eastern portion is led by Radilagajda. Beneath them, the Kazaslovak Legion controls Novosibirsk and rules with an iron fist. Konstantin Radzievsky formed the Krasnoyarsk fascist state, which borders the Confederate Republic of Altai and the Republic of Bratsk. Inmates of the Katorga prisons fled and united in Irkutsk, in what can only be described as a crime state. The Transbaikal host under Gregory Semyonov, which used to reside in Shita, fled to Bagdarin because Roman von Ungern Sternberg formed the Neo-Mongol Empire in Shita. The Far Eastern Republic fled to Zaytungus, Green Ukraine, and Yakutsk declare independence. South of the Amur resides the Pryamurai government under Mikhail Dideriks. The League of Nations occupy Kamchatka. Central Asia is just as bad. Mongolia is split into a communist west and a monarchist center and east, while also dealing with Ungern Sternberg. Kazakhstan is split into three: the Alash Orda in the center, Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic in the north, and Kazakh Khanate in the west. The Bazmashi movement under Enver Pasha split into a western portion bordering the Transcaspian Provisional Government, and an eastern portion bordering the Turkestan Autonomy. Both Bukhara and Khiva remain independent. In Eastern Europe, Lithuania is split into the Republic of Lithuania and Kaunas and the Republic of Central Lithuania and Vilnius, which is however just a Polish vassal state. In Lettoland, Livonia, and Riga, the Baltish Landesor formed the Baltic state, and they are hostile to Latvia and Estonia. Belarus is split into the Belarus Democratic Republic and the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic along the Daugava and Dnipro River. Ukraine meanwhile is split into the Ukrainian People's Republic, Ukrainian State, Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, and Makhnovshchina. The League of Nations occupy Crimea. Finland meanwhile annexes Karelia and the Kola Peninsula. Even without Soviet help, Turkey still wins its independence war, but it is Azerbaijan that helps them take down Armenia, and they annex Karabakh, Zanju and Nakhchivan, leaving only central Armenia behind. In China, the northern expedition fails without Russian support, and I already made a video for that, so check that out. Meanwhile, the great powers have interest in keeping Russia divided, but that ended abruptly in 1929 thanks to the Great Depression, and Russia started to reunify. After a failed expedition into Mongolia, Ungern Sternberg had to abdicate and his lands joined Transbaikal, which gave them an advantage over their enemies, and they conquered Irkutsk. Meanwhile, the Fur conquered Yakutsk, and Primorje conquered Green Ukraine. Transbaikal and Primorje. They partitioned the Far Eastern Republic, with Transbaikal getting more out of it. They then conquered Primorje and then Tungus. They then march into the anarchy of the north, and formed the Far Eastern Host in 1931. In Siberia, Omsk conquered Tomsk, Ekaterinburg conquered Yura, Krasnoyarsk conquered Bratsk, and the Czechoslovak Legion conquered Altai. Then Omsk conquered Ekaterinburg, and the Czechoslovak Legion conquered Krasnoyarsk. In the end, it was the provisional government of Omsk that defeated the foreign oppressors who were allowed free passage to Czechoslovakia. Kolchak then moves into the Northern Anarchy and formed the provisional government of Siberia in 1932. In 1939, Moscow finally managed to reunify Russia after defeating the Bermontians in South Russia and formed the West Russian Soviet Socialist Republic. However, Mr. Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Finland remain independent. Nonetheless, they are the most powerful Russian state, but before they can launch any conquest, they need to rebuild themselves. Turkestan and Alash unify Central Asia, and then they unite peacefully. In Eastern Europe, the Baltic state was defeated by Latvia and Estonia, and the Belarus Democratic Republic and Ukrainian People's Republic won their civil wars, and when Germany invaded Poland, Lithuania reunified by Kaunas, who then moved their capital to Vilnius. Belarus and Ukraine also expanded into Poland, but Ukraine was forced by Germany to give up most of their gains, namely East Galicia. In 1940, after the fall of France, Germany invades the Baltic states, Belarus, and Ukraine, and successfully conquers them. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania become Reichskommissariat Balticum, Belarus becomes Reichskommissariat Vice-Ruthenian, and Ukraine becomes Reichskommissariat Ukraine. In 1941, the Far Eastern Host declared war on Siberia, and seeing an opportunity to annex Siberia, Moscow sends its army to the Urals, but then the Germans invade Russia, meaning they now have to bring back their forces, but to no avail. In a few days, Leningrad got besieged and Moscow fell by July or August. In September, they cut off the Caucasus, which then fell, and soon later the West Russian Soviet Socialist Republic was forced to make peace. On November 7, 1941, 24 years after the October Revolution, the Treaty of Gorky. Germany takes all lands west of the Archangelsk-Astrakhan line, which are split into Reichskommissariat Caucasian and Moscovian. After the war, the army under Alexander Yegorov Trotsky, but this caused a civil war against anarchists in the north and southern Caucasus, which didn't end until 1944. Meanwhile, in Siberia, the U.S. aided Siberia while Japan aided the FEH, but when the U.S. gave Kamchatka to Siberia, they overrun the forces of Semyonov, and the Far Eastern Host collapses. Its territories were annexed while Japan establishes the Principality of Transamur under Prince Roman Petrovich of Russia as Roman I. Transamur is, however, just a puppet state of Japan. Siberia then sets its sights to West Russia, which they invade in 1945, and it just took them a few weeks to make it collapse. They then annex West Russia and form the Provisional Government of Russia. That same year, World War II ends with a negotiated peace deal. Germany keeps its European holdings, but Free France takes French West Africa bearing Algeria, and Italy loses East Africa to the British and Ethiopians. In East Asia, the front line between the Republic of China and reorganized National Government of the Republic of China becomes their de facto border. Japan loses the Philippines and Indonesia, but keeps Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Burma. In 1948, Russia invades Turkestan, and in 1950 Alexander Kolchak dies and Alexander Kerensky becomes head of state of Russia. The plan is to re-establish democracy once Russia is reunited, but they lack West Russia, Transamur, and Finland to be fully reunified. In 1953, Hitler dies and Martin Bormann becomes Führer, and with stability in the Reich falling, the United Nations and Russia declare war on Germany. Russia make quick gains in Moscovian, and the Allies landed in France. Italy and the rest of the Axis remained neutral, but then Italy joined the Allies and opened up a front in the Alps and Balkans while Romania invaded Hungary. They also forced Turkey to join, and together they invaded Bulgaria. In 1955, the Western Allies captured Berlin, ending the war. Bulgaria loses West Thrace to the Republic of Turkey, East Macedonia to the Hellenic state, and southern Dobruja to the Kingdom of Romania, who also annexed northern Transylvania, but lose Bessarabia to Russia, and Croatia annexes Bačka, which alongside Serbia becomes an Italian vassal state, and Italy annexes Slovenia. Norway, Sweden, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Switzerland, and Czechoslovakia all become independent. Russia annexes all lands that were part of the Russian Empire. Germany is split into a Russian occupation zone east of the Elbe, Italian occupation zone in Bavaria, Baden-Württemberg and Austria, and Anglo-American occupation zone west of the Elbe. The Russian occupation zone becomes the Republic of Prussia, the Italian occupation zone becomes the Federal State of Danubia, and the Anglo-American occupation zone becomes the Federal Republic of Germany. After the war, Russia moved its capital from Omsk back to Moscow. Italy becomes the de facto leader of the remaining Axis, and Russia forms the Warsaw Pact with the Bogd Khanate of Mongolia and the Republic of Prussia. In 1960, Russia launches the Winter War against Finland, and unlike the Soviets in our own timeline, the Russians managed to defeat Finland and reannex it, however, with a huge degree of autonomy, which is also implemented in Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Belarus, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Northern Caucasus, and Central Asia. In 1966, the people of East China revolt, and Zhang Zuoliang uses the opportunity to invade East China and drive the Japanese out. With help from the Vietcong and a treacherous Thailand, they also pushed Japan out of Southeast Asia. Russia also joined the war and invaded the Principality of Transamur and Sakhalin. After the war, Japan lost its great power status and re-entered a time of isolation. China, on the other hand, gained a great power status and formed the Indo-Pacific Pact with Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, and Burma. In 1970, Alexander Kerensky dies and Russia holds its first presidential election, and the two main parties are the Social Revolutionaries, which are agrarians, the Kdays, who are liberals. The Social Revolutionaries have close ties to the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, which is Democratic Socialists, and the Labor Group, which is Social Democratic, while the Kdays have close ties to the Octoberists, who are conservative, and progressives, who are liberal conservatives. Then there are also smaller radical parties like the Communist Party of Russia or the Black Hundreds and ethnic parties. The first elected president was Vasily Shulgin of the Kdays, who formed a coalition with the Octoberists and progressives. Both the Axis and the Indo-Pacific Pact would gradually liberalize. In Italy, Spain, Hungary, and Romania, after Ciano, Franco, Horthy, and Antonescu died, Juan Carlos I, Vittorio Emanuele IV, Otto I, and Mihai I liberalized. In Turkey, democracy was established in 1982, and in Iran, after the failed revolution of 1979, Reza Pahlavi III liberalizes. The 1989 revolution in China forced Zhang Zuoliang to resign, and China becomes a democracy, with its first president being Li Thenghui of the Kuomintang. And they also forced to liberalize their puppet states in Burma, Korea, and Malaysia, and convince Vietnam and Thailand to liberalize as well. In this timeline, Afghanistan wouldn't be Islamist, and thus Al-Qaeda wouldn't be in Afghanistan, but somewhere else. In 2011, the Arabs in Spanish Morocco, French Algeria, Italian Libya, which contains Tunisia, and Turkish Syria rise up. France was forced by the United Nations to make peace, and Algeria becomes independent, while Morocco gains independence from Spain after a longer war, but this time without Spanish enclaves. In Libya, the war still rages on, with Italy only controlling the coastal regions, especially Benghazi and Tripoli, while the Syrian independence war froze at the Euphrates, and it was agreed that the river becomes the de facto border of Syria and Turkey. Morocco, Algeria, and Syria join the Arab League. In the 2022 Russian Republic presidential election, Sergei Mironov of the Social Revolutionaries wins and becomes president of Russia. In this timeline, Russia would become a true democracy and a true Eurasian great power, but to get there it would have to go through a period of warlordism and many wars. China would still be a great power, but under the Fengtian, while Italy dominates the Mare Nostrum. If you liked the episode, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Goodbye.